All right, so this is my first time preaching to you guys, so this is kind of exciting. So I wanted to look sharp, so I wore my sharp pants. I know, right? Thank you. Thank you. So you don't have to change my professional review there, Doug. Everybody loves it. Everybody loves it. All right, so I'm going to start with a quote from the Journal of John Wesley Powell. He says, "We are now ready to start our way down the great unknown. We have unknown distance yet to run, an unknown river yet to explore. What falls there are, we know not. What rocks beset the channel, we know not. What walls rise over the river, we know not. With some eagerness and some anxiety and some misgiving, we enter the canyon below." This was one of the first things that I heard when I started learning about youth ministry in college. It's one of the first quotes in our first book. But it kind of talks about this adventure of ministry, this adventure of life, and how it's just completely unexpected. So I thought it was a good thing to start with. Next, I want to read to you guys from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1 through 6. "As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called. There's one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism. One God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each one of us grace has been given as Christ appointed it. This is why it says, when he ascended on high, he led the captives in his train and gave gifts to men. And what does he ascend mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens, in order to fill the whole universe. It was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, and some to be pastors and teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. For him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work." So answering the call of the wild, I kind of added "of the wild" to the end of it to make it a little more jazzy like my pants are, because I like things to match. I know, right? So the call, I don't know if any of you guys have ever experienced one of those things where you truly feel like you're in the right place at the right time, with the right group of people, and honestly, things would never have gone the way they went if every single person wasn't there that was supposed to be there. When you were called to be in a certain place at a certain time. Or when you're in the situation where there's someone that's hurting, when there's someone that really needs someone to talk to. And truly, you're the perfect person for them to talk to, the perfect person for them to truly release the hurt that they have inside. God puts us in situations like this and calls us to situations like this because that's what God created us for. God created us to be used for something greater than any plan that we might have. So we're all called to do things from time to time, whether we realize it or not. We can be thrown in situations that we may never realize the impact that we've had from that situation. But there's always someone, there's always a reason for us to be there. So real quick, I'm going to share with you guys a little bit of my call, of my story, what brought me here. So I started going to church when I was probably about this high, which I know it's hard to believe that I was ever this high. But I think my head was still this size when I was that high. At least that's what my mom tells me. She said it wasn't a great experience. But anyway, moving on, we're going to go back to my mom in a second. So I grew up in the church, and I was about a year old. I was baptized at Wesley Freedom United Methodist Church. Now I remember one day in particular, growing up, going to Sunday school every day. I remember they had these little signs above the doors that had a big K on it for kindergarten and a big 1 on it for first grade. And I remember realizing that, oh, I go to the one with the K when I was in kindergarten. It was just the biggest realization ever for a kindergartner, I know. So I remember one day in particular, I was probably about 10 years old maybe at the time. I really wanted to sleep. You know, I'm 10 years old, I'm getting, about to start middle school, just like, I gotta sleep in. I'm tired of waking up at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, which I woke up at 6:15 today. It was, so 9 o'clock Sunday morning was just ridiculous to me as a 10-year-old. So I decided that I was going to fake sleeping in. And when my mom came to wake me up, I would just pretend like I was asleep, and she would eventually get tired of trying to wake me up and just let it go. So I remember distinctly her saying, okay, whatever, and walking out of the room, and I was still with my eyes closed like this, probably. She comes back in, and I hear her walking back in, not realizing what she was about to do. She had a nice big glass, about this big, full of water, that she proceeded to just dump on my head to wake me up in the morning. That's the first time I was ever woken up with water. Won't be the last, especially in youth ministry, I'm sure. But that's like just one day in particular, kind of going through my Sunday school years. I just remember not really wanting to be at church, not really wanting to be at Sunday school. It was early in the morning, it was kind of dumb. I remember all those little, like, almost newspaper-like booklets that told little Bible stories, little kid stories like Noah's Ark and the burning bush and all the animals and all the great things. The Noah's Ark with animals and awesome stuff. We didn't really talk about the flood and everyone dying. We kind of focused on the good stuff, which I'm sure we do here in Sunday school, which is fine. I don't know, a 6-year-old probably doesn't want to hear about the rest of it. So moving into middle school, I got the option to go to either youth group or Sunday school. And youth group was at like 5:30 in the evening, so it was like, duh. I get to sleep in a little longer. It was going to be great. Wake up at 11 o'clock and then go to youth group in the evening. I remember distinctly my first day showing up. We showed up in the fellowship hall. I knew no one, but still to this day, I remember the leaders that I had. One of them's name was Lois, and one of them's name was Linda. And to this day, I just still remember the impact that they had in my life. So for those of you that do help out with youth, whether you're a teacher or a volunteer, even what's now almost 10 years down the road, I still remember these people fondly. So just take that as encouragement. But anyway, when I was about in 7th grade, I got the opportunity to go on a retreat to Ocean City, Maryland. And Ocean City, Maryland, if any of you guys have been there, is obviously better than Ocean City, New Jersey. If you've never been to Ocean City, Maryland, if you've been to Ocean City, Maryland, you cannot say that Ocean City, New Jersey is better. But anyway, so it was this big conference called ROCK in Ocean City, Maryland, and it was for all the Methodist churches in the Baltimore, Washington conference. So any youth program through them was invited to come to this conference in Ocean City at the convention center. And there was probably about 5,000 people there or so. And there was this awesome speaker named Reggie Dabbs. And I doubt any of you guys have ever heard of Reggie Dabbs. But this man, huge black man, really big guy, awesome. Grew up as a prostitute, or he grew up, his mom was a prostitute, His mom was a prostitute, and he was one of 23 children or something like that, and was adopted by a teacher and a custodian at a school, and raised up in the church, and had another adopted brother. But he tells this story of finally being redeemed, and finally being able to let go of the fact that his mother was a prostitute, and just feeling that he wasn't worth anything. And through his stories and through that weekend, I was able to finally realize what it really meant to be a Christian. Finally realize that it was for real, that it wasn't just some story of animals climbing into this big boat that, at that point in 7th grade, I was like, there's no way they could build a boat big enough to hold that many animals. But I finally realized that this faith that I had was more than just stories. It was more than just something that happened on Sundays. So after this, I was just so excited to be part of the church, to start going. I started going in the morning as well, it had to be an impact on my life if I started going in the morning as well. Doug can tell you that Tuesday morning with our staff meeting, it's just, oh my gosh, sometimes it's unbearable. No offense to Doug, but for me, I'm just but anyway, mornings aren't my thing, as you can see. So through that, I got involved in confirmation. I moved to, just kind of getting involved in everything I could. In high school, I started playing in the band. I actually started playing drums. It was the first thing I started playing. And kind of progressed from there. The summer after my freshman year in high school, we went on a mission trip to Brooklyn. Now, I'm not at my call yet, necessarily. I'm kind of getting close. We went on a mission trip to Brooklyn, New York. We stayed in this church in not the best neighborhood. The church had, an iron fence, probably about yay high, all the way around it. They locked up at night. Up in the basement, you could hear the subway going on the subway tracks every probably 20 minutes or so. But every morning when we were there in this church in downtown Brooklyn, every morning we would have an hour of quiet time, which, I was already tired as it was early in the morning. I think God uses early in the morning to just really pound stuff into my head. As I'm saying this, I'm realizing this. But early in the morning, probably 7 to 8 o'clock before breakfast, we had an hour of quiet time, and we were told we could not fall asleep, that we had to stay awake. So I'm sitting there, probably, if this was the church, I was sitting just down on one of these steps right here, kind of going through this book and filling out the questions and, reading whatever Bible I found at that point, and just kind of praying. And I kind of got to this point where I thought to myself, these devotions that we're doing have to be kind of written by someone or thought of by someone, and I feel like that's something that I could do. And this thought just jumped into my head, and I was like, there's no way I could do this. This is ridiculous. At this point, I wanted to be a chef. I was like, I'm going to go cook stuff, go to culinary school, I'm going to be able to eat whatever I want. It's going to be awesome. And I still love to cook. It's awesome. But God had other plans. So I went through this kind of just really quick kind of jab in the back of my head when I was in Brooklyn to just really kind of focus on maybe there's a plan that God had for my life. Well, after that, I went to this thing called Chrysalis. It's another retreat. I kind of felt that call again, and finally, I was driving by my church one day, thinking about, I moved from being a chef to the idea of doing computer science or something like that, and drove by my church one day and thought to myself, there's no way that I could ever sit behind a desk for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And for some reason, the idea of my youth pastor jumped into my head. So I did a job shadow, went to Eastern University, majored in youth ministry, and finally was able to live out the calling that God had set on my life back in my freshman year, which is what brings me here today. But we're going to move on from my calling and kind of talk about what it means to be called. not everyone is going to be called to ministry, just like not everyone's going to be called to be a missionary or a pastor or an accountant or a fry cook at McDonald's or a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but every one of us here is called to do something. And I know what you're all thinking, well, I have it figured out. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing it right now. I've been doing it for years. I have no intention of changing anything right now, which is fine, okay? If you're set in that and you really honestly think that that's what you're called to, then keep at it, because you might be where God wants you to be. But I just want this kind of message right here to challenge you to think about where you are, and maybe that God is pushing you somewhere else. Every plan that God has for us is awesome. We look at Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future." God's plan is to give us so much more than we could ever plan for ourselves. So there are 4 aspects to a calling, and this is the 4 points. I learned about points from Doug's sermons. So there's 4 points in this, the 4 aspects of the calling. The call to be a Christian, the secret call, the providential call, and the ecclesiastical call. We'll real quick talk about the call to be a Christian. This is a call that everyone receives, but maybe not everyone answers. And this is actually really funny. I was reading about this today. There's kind of 2 ways to look at this. There's 2 types of being called to be a Christian. There's the alarm clock, boom, wake up call, which is kind of like this guy right here. That's kind of like how I look in the morning. That almost looks like me, actually, now that I see it. It's not. I Google imaged it. The greatest example of this in the Bible is Paul and Paul's conversion. This kind of boom, alarm clock moment that you just, wake up. It's instant. When you wake up in the morning and your alarm clock goes off, you're just like, I'm out of bed. I'm not that type of person. It takes me a minute to actually get up. But if you are, that's awesome. The person that I can think of that kind of gets up in the morning ready to go is this fine gentleman right here. This was the only picture I could find of Bob on the internet, but I found something. But there are some of us, and this is more like me, when the alarm clock goes off, this is all I'm thinking. Keep the dream alive. I'm pushing the snooze button over and over again, probably at least 10 times. This morning I had like 8 alarms set on my phone in order to get up, because last time for the pancake breakfast I was late. So there's these 2 types. There's this calling it to be a Christian that when you answer it, you're this boom, awake, I'm alive, this is awesome what we have here. And then there's this gradual kind of waking up to what Christianity is. But this sense of waking up isn't anything new. This is something I'm thinking of right now. Ephesians 5, chapter 5, verse 14. "For it is the light that makes everything visible. This is why it is said, 'Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.'" Which is a verse from Isaiah 60. All right, now real quick, we're running out of time. The secret call. This is this annoying, nagging, sometimes reassuring, but mostly badgering or prodding call that we have to maybe do something different than what we were originally intending. This is the first time that I felt it in Brooklyn, this kind of like, wait, there's no way I could do what you're telling me to do right now. But this secret call is something that everyone gets at some point in their life. Sometimes we just need to open our ears and hear it. My professor for youth ministry, Duffy Robbins, said, "Don't wait for a roadmap. Start moving and let God lead." This is just really just kind of opens just what it means, what the secret call means to me. This idea that this inner sense of call, and it's not that we're supposed to sit there and wait for God to show us the path or wait for God to show us this map. We're just supposed to kind of start going. Even though it's very difficult, just start going in a direction when we know that there might not be anything like, waiting for us on the other side. So this secret call that we get, Moses got this call a little bit louder with the burning bush. And we know that Moses kind of like questioned God, and we know that in the first verse in Isaiah, that Isaiah questioned God, like, how can you send me to do these things? But in the beginning of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 26:29, it says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. So we might not be called necessarily to do the things we're good at, but God will give us the power to do the things that he asks us to do. Real quick, providential call is the idea of a call that when you actually start doing something and you realize that God put you there for a reason. This is when you get that feeling that you know that you're where you're supposed to be. When by example you were able to see that God put you there. And the ecclesiastical call, this a lot of the times applies more to church leaders. When a church leader such as Doug would get ordained, it's kind of like the stamp of approval by the community. Now, the closest thing like this to secular society would be what I was thinking of, would be maybe a politician who the stamp of approval was the community electing him to office. Or maybe getting a promotion, type of thing. So my final question, what does this mean for us? Now honestly, when you're talking about calling, it's so easy to drown out that voice, that secret call. It's so easy to put it aside. It's so easy to just be like, yeah, right, you're going to use me. Use that guy over there. I'm heading this way. I know you want me to go that way, but I'm out here. So our lives are so busy, are so loud, are so full of just distractions that we rarely are able to get that secret voice, that still voice. It says in Matthew, though, Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. It says, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. We're all told that, you're supposed to pray every day, but I know it's much more difficult to say that you're going to pray every day than actually pray every day. I know it's something that I struggled with for years and still struggle with from time to time. But when you pray and when you actually sit there and listen to God, listen for that secret call. Listen to what God really, truly wants you to do. And maybe you're there. Maybe that's exactly what you're doing, but maybe there's one other thing, or two other things, or maybe it's a complete lifestyle change that God is calling you to. Too often I think we sit in church and just listen to the sermon and walk away thinking, oh, that was great. Good inspirational message. And I'm not saying that I'm good at this, but I just want you guys to actually think about something and maybe do something about it. So when I heard on a church floor in Brooklyn, New York, that God wanted me to do this, that God wanted me to be in youth ministry, I ignored it for 3 years, pushing it aside, burying it down. And my plea, my beg of you is to not waste